Books on Tape presents Haunted Ground, written by Erin M. Hart, read by Jennifer McMahon. 1 crow sorrow, 2 crows mirth, 3 crows a wedding, 4 crows birth, 5 crows wealth, 6 crows strife, 7 crows travel, 8 a troubled life. Traditional counting rhyme. Book 1. A Fateful Wound. Creach do dal me im arthoch galer. A fateful wound hath made me a hulk of sadness. Irish poet Davy O'Brudar, 1652. Chapter 1. With a sudden rasp, Brendan McGann's turf spade sliced into the bank of earth below his feet. Had he known all that he'd turn up with the winter's fuel, perhaps he would have stopped that moment, climbed up onto the bank, and filled his shed with the uniform sods of extruded turf that a person could order nowadays by the lorry load. But Brendan continued, loosening each sopping black brick with a square-bladed turf spade, tossing it over the bank where it landed with a plump slap. He performed his task with a grace and facility that comes from repeating the same motion times without number. Though his father and grandfather and generations before had taken their turf from the same patch of bog, Brendan never thought of himself as carrying on an age-old tradition, any more than he considered the life cycles of all the ancient primitive plants whose resting place he now disturbed. This annual chore was the only way he'd ever known to stave off the bitter cold that crept under his door each November. Chilblains were the farthest thing from Brendan's mind this unusually sun-drenched late April morning. A steady westerly breeze swept over the bog, chasing high clouds across the watery blue of the sky and teasing the moisture from the turf. "Good drying today," his father would have said. Brendan worked in his shirt sleeves. His wool jacket, elbows permanently jointed from constant wearing, lay on the bank above his head. He paused, balancing his left arm on the handle of the upright schlein, and with one rolled-up sleeve mopped the sweat from his forehead, pushing away the damp, dark hair that stuck there. The skin on his face and forearms was beginning to feel the first pleasant tightness of a sunburn. Hunger was strong upon him at the moment, but just beyond it was an equally hollow feeling of anxiety. This might be the last year he could cut turf on his own land without interference. The thought of it burned in the pit of his stomach. As he clambered up the bank to fetch the handkerchief from his coat pocket, he searched the horizon for a bicycle. 40 yards away, his younger brother Fintan made a comic figure as he struggled against the weight of a turf-laden wheelbarrow. Fintan dumped his 24 wet sods at the end of a long row, one of many that lent the surface of the bog the temporary texture of corduroy. For a good square mile around them, little huts of footed turf covered the landscape. Here and there on the neighbours' allotments, large white plastic bags bulged with sods dried as hard as dung. "Any sign of her yet?" Brendan shouted to his brother, who raised his shoulders in a shrug and kept at his work. The 2 men had been hard at it since 9, with only a short tea break mid-morning. Their sister Una was to bring them sandwiches and tea, and pitch in with footing the turf. It was cumbersome, back-breaking work, turning the sods by hand so that they dried in the sun. It would be another month before this lot could be drawn home. Tucking his handkerchief in his back pocket, Brendan descended once more into his grave-like void, noting with a small grimace of satisfaction the angled pattern his schlein had made down the wall of the bank. He was reaching the good black turf now, more appreciated in these parts for its long burning density than for the fact that it had remained in this place, undisturbed and undecayed for perhaps 8,000 years. He set to work again, trying to drown out the rumbling in his belly by concentrating on the sound and the rhythm of the cutting. He was used to hard physical labour, but there was no doubt about it. Something in the bog air put a fierce hunger on a man. What might the day's lunch be? Chicken sandwiches, or egg, or perhaps a bit of salty red bacon on a slab of brown bread. Each stroke became a wolfish bite, a slug of hot, sweet tea to wash it down. 1 more row, he thought, heaving each successive sod with more violence. Just 1 more row. and then his blade stopped dead. Shite! Finton's head poked into view at the edge of the cutaway. What's the matter? Strike a bit of Noah's Ark down there. Och, no, Brendan said. Only a bit of horsehair. There were 4 things their father always said that could stop a man cutting turf. Brendan could hear the old man's voice. Wig, water, blocks, and horsehair. Then he'd hold up 4 fingers in front of their faces. Meet any of them, boys, and it's your Waterloo. Hand us down the spade, will you? Finton obliged, then leaned on the handle of his fork to watch. Though these things typically turned out to be tree trunks and roots, other wonders turned up in bogs occasionally. Rough beams of oak, ancient ox carts, wheels of cheese or wooden tubs of butter, stores buried for keeping in cool wetness and long since forgotten, objects caught and suspended outside of time by the watery, airless, preserving power of the bog. Working deliberately, Brendan dug around the perimeter of the fibrous mat, probing for its edges and scraping away loose bits of peat. He knelt on the spongy bank and pulled at the strands that began to emerge from the soaking turf. This wasn't horsehair. It was tangled and matted all right, but it was too long and far too fine to be the rooty material his father called horsehair. Brendan worked his broad fingers into the dense black peat he'd pried loose with the spade. Without warning, a block in his left hand gave way and he cast it aside. Holy Christ! Finton whispered, and Brendan looked down. Almost touching his knee were the unmistakable and delicate curves of a human ear. It was stained a dark tobacco brown, and though the face was not visible, something in the line of the jaw and the dripping tangle of fine hair above it told him at once that this ear belonged to a woman. Brendan struggled to his feet, only dimly aware of the cold water seeping through the knees of his trousers and down into his Wellingtons. Oh, sorry, lads. You must be perished with the hunger. Una's breathless apology carried toward them on a bit of breeze. But you should have seen me. I was literally up to my elbows. Her voice trailed off when she saw the faces her brothers turned toward her. Brendan watched her stained fingers tighten their grip on the flask and on the sandwiches she'd wrapped hastily in paper, as Una stepped to the edge of the bank beside Finton and looked down at their awful discovery. Oh, Jesus, poor creature, was all that she could say. Chapter 2. Cormac Maguire was in the shower when the call came. He let it ring as he customarily did until the answer phone came on. But hearing the excitement in Pedder Wynne's voice, he hastily wrapped himself in a towel and sprinted down the stairs, hoping to catch Pedder before he rang off. Cormac stood just over 6 feet, and though he'd begun to feel a few creaks during the passage of his 39th year, still possessed a rower's lean, muscular frame. His dark brown hair was cut short, intense dark eyes, a long, straight nose, and a square jaw defined his angular face. His pale olive complexion would soak up sun as he spent time in the field during the summer months. He had neglected to shave for the past couple of days, and now water dripped at irregular intervals from his chin to his bare chest. Pedder, a technician in the archaeology department at University College Dublin, where Cormac was on the faculty, was a normally languid young man, whose concave frame and large hands invariably put Cormac in mind of a stick figure from an ancient cave painting. The cause of Pedder's agitation was soon clear. Some farmers cutting turf had discovered a body yesterday in a raised bog near Lough Derg in the southeast corner of County Galway, about 2.5 hours west of Dublin. Although hundreds of bog bodies had turned up in Central Europe, mostly in Germany and Denmark, they were somewhat of a rarity in Ireland. Fewer than 50 such discoveries had ever been made in Irish bogs, and they offered an unparalleled opportunity to gaze directly into the past. Peat bogs not only preserved skin, hair, and vital organs, but even subtle facial expressions, and often revealed what a person who drew his dying breath 20 centuries ago had taken for his last meal on earth. Modern turf-cutting methods often damaged bog bodies. If this was a complete specimen, it would be the first in nearly 25 years,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?